Hello, my name is Adrienne Dager. This is my book presentation for my nonprofit, managing the nonprofit class. This is Darcy, Mr. Darcy, and he's going to be joining me because his dad is putting older brother down to bed right now. So I am talking about the book Strategic Planning for Nonprofit Organizations, A Practical Guide for Dynamic Times by Allison and Kaye. I have the third edition of the book, and it was published in 2015, so there may or may not be newer editions available. But as an overview, this book is, like it says, a guide for strategic planning for nonprofits. I would highly recommend it, at least to get involved with or to dip your toes into or start thinking about the strategic planning process, especially a used copy. I found it very helpful, but I'll talk about more of what the book has to offer at the end of my presentation. I'll start with a chapter overview. So the introduction sets the tone for the rest of the book by defining strategic planning and outlining the author's use of key terms. So I would not skip the introduction. Strategic planning to Allison and Kaye is an intentional, responsive, data-informed process that aligns the players within and without an organization in the assessment of current positions and programs, allocations of resources, meeting goals, what those goals are, the mission itself, that sort of thing. So Allison and Kaye break up the process of strategic planning into three major steps, which the rest of their chapters revolve around, and then there's sub-steps under each of these three. But the first is first steps, then strategic analysis, and then setting course. Excuse me. At the end of the introduction, they give a quote from Warren Bennis, which is, "Managers are people who do things right, and leaders are people who do the right thing." And then Allison and Kaye elaborate on that by saying strategic planning is both a leadership tool and a management tool, which I really appreciate. I know back in one of our earlier classes, we were talking about the difference between management and leadership. And I fall on the line that both are important and are different. And so I appreciated hearing this particular definition, and that strategic planning really should assess and touch both the leadership side of things and the management side of things. Chapter one is setting up for success. This chapter covers the necessary prep work for an effective planning process. Allison and Kaye say, chief among the prerequisites of starting that strategic planning is a true commitment to the planning process by the executive director and board leadership. In other words, if you don't have executive director and board leadership committed to and invested in the planning process, it's not worth undertaking. It's not going to go anywhere. So that is the first prerequisite, the most important prerequisite to undergoing strategic planning. The setup includes writing down expectations, issues, outcomes of the process itself with multiple internal stakeholders. Another quote from Allison and Kaye is, you have to agree on the ends, what you will accomplish, before you can agree on the means, how you will accomplish it, which might seem obvious, but things have to be said in the strategic planning process to make sure everyone's actually on board. You don't want to leave things assumed or left under the rug. Another step of getting started is checking the conditions, making sure that your organization is actually ready to undergo strategic planning and that it will be useful. And the book has a checklist that you could walk through with your organization, just a litmus test for seeing, hey, is now the right time for undergoing strategic planning, or what do we need to do to get ready for this? Stakeholder engagement is chapter two. Another quote from Allison and Kaye, the most important outcome of strategic planning is not the document itself, but the actual decisions made with shared understanding and commitment of board and staff. In this way, some say the process is the product. Getting people on the same page, making decisions that are shared in understanding and commitment, that is the real benefit. Not just, coming up with a PDF that you can print out and share with people, even though I tend to think that's important too. This stakeholder engagement step is not about achieving consensus, Allison and Kaye say. It's a time to do your SWOT assessments. It's a time to get people around the table. And then decisions and unity can happen later. But this step really kind of pulls everybody to the table. Chapter 3 is covering mission, vision, and values, which we've talked a lot about in our various classes. Make sure you have these in place before starting or make it a part of the planning process really early on to record and unify everybody around. Maybe you need to revisit an established mission statement, that sort of thing. This might be the time to do that. Chapter 4 involves an environmental scan that's looking at internal and external realities and then running scenarios to see are we ready. It's a measure of readiness for change and how kind of resilient the organization is. This chapter was a pretty short one, and I would be interested in hearing some other resources that talk about this environmental scan step because I didn't fully understand it as much as I would like to. Chapter 5 discussed developing a theory of change in a program portfolio. So, theory of change is a program strategy from afar, from really up high, and it asks, how are we going to accomplish the mission, and kind of lays it out in a flow chart. If your organization does not have one of those, strategic planning process is an excellent time to build one out based on what you do have, a mission, your pre-existing programs, that sort of thing. The program portfolio then is a collection, it's a full list of the programs that you utilize to achieve your mission. These can each be looked through in depth, internally and externally, to assess their needs, competition, how to maximize impact, that sort of thing. That's tied really closely with Chapter 6, which is about the business model of the organization, checking financial soundness and fitness, assessing programs by which ones you should grow, maintain, reduce, or cut. There's a really great matrix in here for assessing your programs on a chart of profitability versus impact. So if something's really high profit and really high impact, it'll be in one quadrant, and you're kind of laying out your programs into different quadrants. And then Allison and Kaye have recommendations for what to do to various programs in each quadrant. Chapter 7 was about organization capacity. This I feel like is often skipped, and I think Allison and Kaye also point out that it's often skipped or not really delved into. This is checking up on your internal culture, communication, day-to-day operations that impact planning and programs from underneath. So are your books actually being kept accurately? Is the culture one of service or that values your particular target population? Those details. And one of the reasons that they're often skipped is because the people involved in strategic planning sometimes aren't very involved in the day-to-day of an organization. So another reason to have a lot of stakeholders from your own organization involved in the process, or at least certain processes, so that you know your organization's capacity for real, not just what it is on paper. Chapter 8 is about leadership. Leaders mobilize others to take action. They do this by modeling, inspiring shared vision, challenging the process, enabling others to act, and encouraging the heart of the organization. So the big question here is what is actually needed from the board and from staff leadership? Chapter 9 is about completing the plan. Congratulations. Allison and Kaye say that you ensure all assessments and decisions made in the strategic planning process are recorded on paper and they're alive in the hearts and minds of board and staff leaders. So I'll say that again. Everything you do in the strategic plan process should be recorded in two places, on paper and in the actual hearts and actions of the leadership of the organization, which I think is a really beautiful way to put that. Again, reiterating that you could walk away with a really long, detailed PDF strategic plan or a paper plan, but if it's not actually living in the people who are directing the organization, it's not going to go anywhere. Another key step of completing the plan is celebrating and then communicating that plan. I love the celebrating step. It's a big part of the process. You want people to walk away feeling really positive about what they've accomplished together, kind of solidifying some of those relationships made and hopefully strengthened in the process, even if they were put to the test a little bit, and making sure to thank everyone that was involved internally and externally who gave their input so that they know their work was important and that you're grateful for it. Chapter 10 is about using the plan successfully. Here you're communicating clearly and with urgency changes that may have come about through the plan, clearing a path so that those changes can take place, and then inspiring commitment and passion for the organization involving the strategic plan in the operational plan. If your strategic plan isn't touching your budget or your annual operational planning, it's not going to get into the day to day and it's just going to disappear. So that's one of the key pieces Allison and Kaye mentioned at the end. Overall, this work was extremely helpful. It was a good step-by-step overview of the whole planning process with various options and considerations. It really highlighted how flexible the process is, and things you can decide to take or leave as an organization based on what you need. But again, there's a lot of key things that Allison and Kay recommend that you hit, and I think they do a good job of highlighting those things. I definitely see the value of hiring a consultant for this process because it's a lot to plan. It's a lot of information to pull together. I mean, you have to plan, and that's got to be somebody's role, and that's a really big role. Lastly, and the most awesome thing about this particular text that I kind of hinted at earlier is that there are worksheets. Even getting a used copy of this third edition gives you access to PDF fillable worksheets to walk through each step of the process. There's at least one sheet per chapter here, per part of the process. And you could undertake a mini strategic planning process just using those worksheets. Maybe you want to dip your toe in the water or see, like, is there an area we should focus on more? You could start by filling those in or having a couple people in your organization fill those in and see, oh yeah, we do have some points at which we disagree here, and so should delve in more closely. That was absolutely the most useful thing in here, and I look forward to hopefully putting those to use a little bit in the future, both for my own department at work and maybe in future nonprofits. So that is my report on strategic planning for nonprofit organizations.